The claim I'm responding to tonight is that lack of exercise is a reason for childhood obesity. The advocate supported his claim with three main points. One, that children do not get a sufficient amount of exercise. Two, that parents fail to promote exercise. And three, that school systems provide less physical activity than necessary. Tonight I'll explore the reasoning flaws of each claim and which render why my opponent's argument is unacceptable. I will do so by following the order in which the secondary claims are presented. The advocate first claimed that children do not get a sufficient amount of exercise. An immediate concern is then with how sufficient is defined. The advocate failed to mention just how long or how strenuous exercise would need to be in order to be deemed sufficient. The California State Board of Education, policy number 9903, states that children are required to have a minimum of 200 minutes of physical education for every 10 days in school. So that evens out about 20 minutes of PE per day, not including recess time. So according to our state government, this is a sufficient amount of exercise. Now, sufficient enough for the excess amount of calories children consume, that becomes a different matter. But in which case, the cause is blamed mostly on diet rather than exercise. Within this claim, the advocate cited his cousin as an example, as children who have lost the drive to be active or competitive. However, he failed to claim if his cousin was in fact obese or remotely overweight. Relying on credibility alone, we could trust that he has a lazy cousin. But if he is an obese, meaning a full 20% over normal body weight, the claim becomes completely irrelevant. So based on ambiguous language and inadequate and possibly irrelevant evidence, this claim of children having insufficient exercise ought to be dismissed. The advocate secondly claimed that parents of children fail to promote exercise. However, this claim was based entirely on hearsay and limited personal experience. He supported his claims by saying that parents are too busy to pay attention to the physical activity of their kids and that parents aren't pushing their kids out of the home to play. However, my opponent failed to present statistics or facts by which to justify these generalizations. And when the advocate did give us an example to compare by, he presented it from a very small sample, his own family. Now, automatically the legitimacy of the sample is compromised because the person collecting the information has a potential bias. And the information is much too limited from which to draw a nationwide generalization. This time he cited his niece as an example and did provide ample evidence to prove that she is unfortunately lazy, but again he forgot to inform us whether she's obese or not. And this once again gives the grounds the possibility of being completely irrelevant. So due to illegitimate evidence, the claim that parents fail to promote exercise must be dismissed. The advocate's third claim was that school systems provide less activity than children need. The advocate asserted this claim based off the idea that schools are cutting out physical education in order to provide more academic education. However, I already mentioned that the California policy mandates that each school provide a certain amount of physical education for each student. Despite the cuts that California schools are suffering these days, physical education isn't being cut. And I can say this with assurance because the California policy hasn't been changed or updated since 1999. So schools are still held to the same standard. How is it then that the advocate referenced an article that claimed LA Unified School District was cutting down and offering less PE programs? Well, the answer is pretty simple. The article claimed the exact opposite. The article titled Budget Crisis Interference with Students' Elective Choices by Patrick Avalon labeled physical education as another course that wastes LA Unified School District's funding. The article claimed that PE shouldn't be mandatory for kids that don't want to grow up to be athletes. The article goes on to say that LA Unified School District is forcing students that don't play sports to participate in PE classes, therefore reassuring us that physical education isn't being removed, but rather forced on students whether they like it or not. And this is only at the high school level, but I can assure you that as a bilingual instructional associate at an elementary school, I can personally assure you that they're being provided with enough physical education for the day. Besides having 25 minutes of PE daily, I know that at my school they have at least 55 minutes of spent out at recess, where not just one or two children are spent running around, but literally hundreds. So due to its false nature, the claim that schools are offering less than enough physical education must be justifiably denied. Overall, the advocate acknowledges a factor in obesity, lack of exercise, but fails to mention the one factor that obesity can never occur without, food. If we take a look at third world countries, we see the children and realize they're not light in weight because they're constantly outside, but rather because they lack food. Even the Center for Disease and Control Prevention admits that childhood obesity is a result of eating too many calories. So ultimately, the argument of my opponent was based on overgeneralized facts, hearsay, and overall insufficient proof. Therefore, as an audience, we cannot accept the claim that lack of exercise is the cause for childhood obesity.
All right, you labeled everything very clearly. Signposting was good internally. The issue of sufficiency, you kind of challenge it. It does sound a little bit circular by the definition that you have, but I do like the idea that you bring in the notion of diet being a part of this, because it has to do with what's sufficient depends upon the amount of calories that's consumed. And this is one of the places where you really are presenting a counterclaim, but you need to have a little bit more evidence on it, and I think it would help to have it early in the speech. At the end of the speech, come back to the issue again, and there seems to be a presupposition here, and I don't doubt that you could find some information on this and present it pretty conveniently. So I think that that's just an opportunity that you don't take advantage of, although most of the other opportunities you do a very good job on. Your analysis of the advocate's evidence and the way they've inferred conclusions from them, I think, is pretty solid. In fact, I kind of enjoyed the notion that, they're lazy but not necessarily fat, and therefore you can't make the inference that they are having these particular problems there. When the advocate's using example evidence, and it's personal example evidence, and they don't provide sufficient details, I think that's a good challenge to make on a point like that. I'm not sure that the bias issue gets you very far. That seemed like a little bit of an extra stretch there to get to that. I thought you had good information on the California standards concerning what's required. You do a little bit of the same thing, using your personal experience as a way of making a generalization about the amount of activity that the kids at school get. And I think that that's a good starting point, but again, I think that there should be a little bit more follow-up on that. All right, thank you.